But I think it's kind of sad because, like, yeah, the Christian story is that, like, God. It's really that simple, right? Like Calvinists, some Calvinists make it like an ivory tower thing, but it really just is as simple as that. Like this Creator loves sinners so much that He sends His Son to die for them. That's the story. So it's easy to lose track of that in the everyday things of life, and especially when you're experiencing suffering.
Well, but it's the nature of the procession. If you proceed from the source that is a father, then you must be a son and an only son. This is the nature of a procession. Have you ever heard the word procession? Have you paid heed to the prefix pro in the word procession?
There's just gonna be stuff like that. Right?
Well, you see, the word responsible, it's in the word. Response. Able. You have to be able to respond. Part of what moral responsibility is.
Can I ask Jimmy a question? Jimmy, is that okay with you, sir?
Jimmy,
What's
don't
up,
any questions.
Jimmy, tell me if you think this is a good argument.
No.
Propositions themselves are mental objects. There are necessary propositions, therefore there are necessary mental objects, therefore there's a necessary mind.
Going to have problems with, two of those.
yeah, that's like Anderson's argument.
Yeah, what's the problem?
Do I think it's a good argument? Yeah, so I think it's kind of like a scientific model. It's like that's cool, and it's like reasonable. Like I don't think I don't see any reason why it's like, oh, that's impossible, that's just stupid, blah blah blah. But I have two qualms. The first is like there are if you're trying to make a knockdown argument for like God or something out of that, there's all kinds of little problems in logic that the average layman does not know, and that are right around the corner with all that stuff. There's like problems with modality that has to deal with. But the biggest problem is going to be the issue of God and abstract objects.
Yeah, the issue of modality doesn't bother me that much at all. Like, what are you thinking would be a problem with modality?
Oh, just like well, you don't want to say that God's just like merely necessary.
Yes, I do. No, go ahead.
I don't know.
Jimmy.
I'm if somebody makes that argument, I'm probably not gonna. I'm neither going to defend that as like, oh, it's a knockdown proof of God, but
you don't
I'm
hold
also
you also don't hold to that view of abstract objects, though. So
no, I don't. I don't think that propositions are like these floating things around that God like.
Oh, you're a nominalist.
no.
No.
What is the ontology of propositions exactly?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would just to be honest with you, I would default to Mysterianism, but I think it probably is like probably think that it's like the plan of God instantiated in the Son in His condescension or something like that.
That is a definition of proposition? Of the ontology,
It's
I
not a
mean?
definition. Yeah, it's an ontology of proposition. Yeah.
What? Okay, how many types all right, your ontology includes how many types of things? Like physical, mental, what else?
Ultimately, there's only two. There is God and there's creation.
Okay, are there mental objects?
Yes. So there's subsets of the second type.
Tell me all those
So
subsets.
there. I don't know that I could give you an exhaustive list. I do think that there's a categorical distinction between mind and body.
That's fine. Let me ask you this question: can God be predicated upon?
Yeah.
Are any of the predications like univocal?
Yes, but only in his condescension. So, like the Jesus is God via the communicatio idiomatum, or via the fact that properties of his natures can be attributed to the Son in general. You can say that God the Son is univocally someone who died. God died on the cross.
Okay, could a sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I think you know where I'm going. Go ahead.
Yeah, do you think an Old Testament saint could univocally speak of God?
Yes, but again, I want to be careful. This view is controversial, right? But I take it that God has always condescended. So God has always had some kind of self-representation in the world that assumes to itself a creaturely nature. So God has always been like a kingly ruler in the world, moving around, being in specific places and not others, learning things, experiencing ignorance. But he does that because he voluntarily chooses to condescend and assume that nature, and that in no way threatens his omniscience or his immutability or any of these things that he possesses outside of the universe, and which he has timelessly, even as he condescends to enter the universe. So yes, I do think that an Old Testament saint could look and say, um, God's fiery, and he points to like the pillar of fire, right? He wouldn't say something like, I don't know what the Old Testament saint would say, but like he'll talk in a way like as if God's fire, and he'll be that thought is protected by the fact that God has taken on a form that is fire.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So, but when like, let's say the prophet Isaiah is talking about God himself, right? Because Isaiah talks about like God's attributes. Do you think he's not talking about like an instantiation of God in creation, is he? He's talking about like God himself.
I think almost any text that you look at, bro, is gonna move back and forth.
Bro.
So a text like me and you, right? Me and you will move back and forth between saying like God died for the sins of the world, or God sent his son, or any of this stuff, and then we'll talk about how God is timeless and he doesn't change. So which one are we talking about? Are we talking about like God representing himself in creation, or are we talking about God in and of himself? Well, both, right? We move back and forth between those things. You need one to talk about the other.
Okay, that's interesting. Let me go back a couple steps. So, dealing with like the proposition argument, what would be like your first critique of somebody who's like a Platonist? Like if somebody takes like Platonism.
Oh, that's easy. Yeah. So Platonism. So like to me, there's a bunch of different objections, but to me, um, like with respect to propositions, there's two that I think are the most convincing to me. One is a vacuity objection, and that's to say that like um, propositions as we conceive of them have certain qualities. They have specific content and so forth. But what does it look like for there to be an object that is a proposition and there's no um, specific content that it has, or like a specific state of affairs that it corresponds to?
Say the same, elaborate on that in a different way. Say the same thing in a different way.
Yeah, like presumably, like a Platonist about propositions thinks that there's just like these abstract objects and they just exist. and their propositions. But the problem is that propositions are about things. They're necessarily intentional or referential or whatever you want to say, right? So, in what sense can a proposition exist independent of the state of affairs which it describes?
What would a Platonist say right there at that juncture?
Probably, I would imagine that he'll give some kind of story about instantiation. That like the whole point of instantiation is that the world exemplifies these propositions. Specifically, there are instances of propositional truths that pop up in the world, and so it could be the case that um, these things are kind of correlated. Like there's a dualism going on. It's not that these platonic objects can exist by themselves, but they can have a sort of independence in that there's kind of a separate world of propositions looking back down on the world, like a mirror that of descriptions. That's probably he'll say something like that.
Yeah, the propositions reference state of affairs
Yeah.
or something. They're about states of affairs in the world.
Well, and specifically, they're gonna have specifically the idea would be that like they're um he, if I were going to be a Platonist, I would like maybe try to grant that propositions can't exist by themselves, but they do have a certain kind of independence in that they're not like they're causally inert. They're not causally dependent on the world, and the world doesn't really like have a unilateral explanation for propositions any more than propositions can unilaterally explain the world. Rather, they're both uh, components that necessitate each other of the world.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So then, if they said something like that, what would you say?
I would want to know more about this instantiation relation. Why? So let's say that I took Anderson's view just for the sake of argument, right? And I said, well, I let's suppose that propositions are kind of like that, but they're really like divine thoughts, and so there is kind of a mirror of the world, but that's because there's like this divine plan for the world, and this divine plan or this like divine blueprint of the world is where you get all these propositions describing it. Now, on that view, it makes sense that the world is represented by these like it's described by them. It can quote unquote instantiate them maybe in some kind of sense because there's this creator who causes the world to map onto them this way, or for the propositions to map onto the world that way. But if I take that creator out of the picture, I just don't know why the world is such that it correlates with these propositions at all.
Sorry, I'm having kids. I'm having dinner with my kids, and they're being bastards. That,
Like I think the Platonist is going to say, I think the Platonist is going to shrug, but the problem is going to be why would we prefer the Platonic picture of quote unquote instantiation over the creationist picture? And I just don't think the Platonist has like any good reasons to prefer it.
all right. All right. That makes sense. Now, about like God and His nature, can you speak univocally about God Himself?
Can I speak univocally about? No. So like the the way I can speak about God univocally is when He takes on the properties which we share, and in virtue of which we have univocal predicates, right? But at some point, that there's a backdrop behind that of God is not um, God is irrelative. He's not qualified by these properties. And so we are going to have to rely on what he says when he does come down as a man and talk to us. We're going to have to rely on what he says as a man to us about what he's like when he's not a man, in order to speak of what he's like when he's not a man like us.
So when God talked to Isaiah, when God said, "My thoughts are not your thoughts," right? Was he saying that God had a mind?
Yeah, I think we can say God has a mind. But when we say that, I think here's what I think is going on, right? I think what happens is our experience of a mind and our concept of a mind that is there in our experience, which we're given by God because it's revelatory, just is a medium of understanding what his mind is like. In other words, like if I say something like, don't think of elephants, what are you thinking about?
You're Craig, William Lane Craig down there looking thick.
Oh my. Oh my. Yeah, right. Well, the point is like language is causal, right? So
Oh
when we're
yeah,
talking
yeah,
to each
yeah.
other,
No, I get it.
yeah, when we're talking to each other, we like cause each other to have an exchange of ideas. And what I'm saying is when God creates the human mind, that is itself an expression of what he's like. So we learn what God's mind is like by experiencing human minds. And our ability to verbally articulate anything about that is going to have to be sanctioned by God's verbal revelation about it. Like, you can't go beyond the mere experience of the mind and be silent about it unless God comes down, takes on that mind, and then starts talking to you about it. Otherwise, you're just left with, you've got this language, you've got this divine language, so to speak, in creation of what he's like. You see trees, you see cars, you see people, and all this stuff says something about God. And you have some kind of acquaintance with him through it. But you're not going to have any ability to start constructing theology out of that unless he comes down and interprets it for you.
Okay, that makes sense. Do you think all revelation in Scripture is like that? Like all revelation in Scripture is God like condescending?
Yes. I think that's the uniqueness of Reformed theology. The Reformed theology starts from the get-go of saying God is holy. He's infinite. He's not like us. So we can have no fruition of him unless he comes down to our level, unless he stoops down and tells us. Otherwise, he's completely beyond human comprehension. He's incomprehensible. The only apprehension we have of God is what he himself delivers to us. It's utterly authoritative. It is a type of epistemological authoritarianism.
I guess the next question I should ask is so what, you would never run Anderson's argument? You just don't agree that propositions are mental objects or something?
Don't agree that propositions are. I'm honestly more inclined to think that propositions are more like a social construct, and I do think like God is indispensable to that, but I think it's more I think it's more participatory. Then Anderson makes it kind of like this unilateral thing, and Anderson runs into like a vacuity problem. If you go and watch his conversation with Alex Malpass is like hitting the nail on the head as far as I'm concerned as to like how that runs into a very old Platonist problem. But
Don't you think only propositions can be true?
no, I don't think that.
What else can be
No, I don't
true
think.
that's not a proposition?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, yeah. I don't know. It seems to me like truth is a more opaque notion than just a property of propositions or something like that. It seems like it's kind of to me like, because when we talk about this property, it's very hard to explain what that is. And there's kind of like this constellation of factors that we want to go together. Like there's correspondence and there's like coherence. There's like a there's almost like an evidential merit of like how these of how truth is like mutually supporting or something like that. Like there's all these different factors that we want to go together, and it seems to me like whatever truth is, it should be the thing that undergirds or unites all those factors rather than being reducible to any one of them.
Yeah, but I mean, so you disagree that only propositions can be true, though?
Yeah, I'm not convinced that's true.
What else can be true besides a proposition?
Well, the Bible talks about people being true, right?
Yeah, well, the Bible talks about like the eyes of the Lord on little feet travel to and fro.
Yeah, but I'm not convinced that it's being as metaphorical as we might want to hand wave it.
Yeah, but I mean, if somebody's true, doesn't that mean they speak truth?
No, imagine, because you wouldn't want to say, like, we want to say Jesus is the truth, and that does entail that that what he says is true, but it doesn't mean that like he merely describes accurately how many grains of sand there are at a certain beach, right? Like it has something to do with like where he stands in history and like who he is as a being.
Yeah, doesn't that mean like he's the source of truth?
Yeah, so that's a good interpretation. That's like maybe closer to like what the Bible's aiming at. But like,
Yeah, but that's just a proposition.
yeah, well,
What else is true
I think that's
besides a
kind of
proposition?
wait, hold on, So I think that's kind of to lose track of the thing there. Though. You're right that the Bible's verbal communication is in terms of propositions. There's no disagreement there, but uh, that's not to say that the propositions the Bible expresses um, are are as follows: the only things that are true are propositions, or that when the Bible describes Jesus as being the truth, it's saying he's a proposition, or it's saying that he only expresses true propositions. The point is like if we want to say that being the truth in the Bible is something like being the source of it, then that's some kind of bigger metaphysical notion than just like um you say true things, right? That's like saying like there's some kind of idea of truth, and all these things like propositions that acquire some kind of property that has to do with truth. That's like a that's like a ramification of what truth is, but it's not really like it's not the essence of it. It's not reducible to that.
Do you think only propositions can be true, though? I heard what you said. I heard everything. But do you think only propositions can be true?
No, I've given you a counterexample, right? I think people can be true.
Yeah, but like if I'm a true person, doesn't that mean like I just don't lie?
No, I think it has something to do with like usually what somebody means is like you've got integrity, right? Or you're faithful to some notions that you should be faithful to, or you have like fidelity to other people or something like that. But I think that's telling. You may have reasons to disagree, and that's fine. I don't consider this like an open and shut issue. I'm open to different takes on this, but I think it's telling that we treat fidelity as so closely uh, as so intimately united with our notion of truth in general. Like, what does fidelity really have to do with true propositions? Well, the story that you tell about what they have to do with each other is probably going to be closer to what you think the essence of truth is than merely a property that some propositions hold.
That's what I take truth to be. Yeah, truth is just the value of propositions.
Yeah, I think we use the word that way, and that's fine. But I think there's a bigger metaphysical story as to what truth is. I'm inclined to think that truth has something to do with like the harmony and agreement, which can be thought of as faithfulness in the Godhead, and that can be expanded so that human beings participate in that. I don't know what you want to call it, like cohabitation agreement, right? Because like if you imagined that propositions were like social constructs, if you thought that they were not social constructs merely in the sense that like we invent them or like a constructivist, right? But we have like some idea that like human beings are just kind of intrinsically united to God, and part of human experience is like interacting with God on a social level and everything that we do, then you kind of are always part of this social sphere where you're talking to each other, you're communicating with each other. You use propositions are like tools that you use to do that. And that means that like the more fundamental idea of what truth is that you've got some kind of harmony or agreement or like union, like your friends almost in the way that you think about the world.
Yeah, I hate that view.
I could be wrong. Like I'm not trying to sell this as like, oh, I figured this all out. I'm just saying like this is the position I'm inclined to think, because I think it makes good sense of how like multifaceted words like truth are, why we have like this weird constellation of intellectual merits, uh, why some people emphasize coherence over correspondence, why some people emphasize correspondence over coherence. This is the kind of thing where it's like, I feel like this could put those together and not make them like competing theories, but really just aspects of a greater concept.
Well, I don't really want you to like repeat everything you said, but I don't know why I should believe that truth is not the property of propositions. Can you summarize it for like a dumb person? Like imagine you're talking to somebody who's like really stupid.
Let me give you a really practical problem, right? What is that property? Like when you say a proposition has the property of being true, what is that?
I take it it's like something God thinks.
Okay, so that's really weird though, right? That's like saying only true propositions exist.
Well, I think God thinks like some propositions are false.
Okay.
And I also think like everything exists. I don't think like exist is a predicate.
Okay, sure, but I think I could just rephrase what I'm saying, right? It seems like if propositions are like thoughts that God has, or excuse me, if you think the property of being true with respect to propositions is that God possesses the proposition, then what about a proposition like um, the current imperial overlord of the globe of the earth has white hair?
Well, it would be time indexed for God, and then also he would think that that's not true.
You think that it's not true?
Yeah, like God thinks some stuff is not true.
Okay, but right, but I'm just trying to get clear. Like to say that he thinks it's not true would just mean that he possesses the proposition that this proposition is not true.
Yeah.
But what is he referencing when he says this proposition is not true?
What he thinks.
But he doesn't think that the current ruler of the globe has white hair,
Yeah,
right?
that's why that proposition is not true.
We need like a screen sharing software so that I can draw this on Paint, because I think you're losing track of. If you imagine, like, okay, we got God's mind over here. You got God's mind. You imagine like a Venn diagram, right? You got God's mind. It's a little circle, and we're going to put into that circle true propositions. That's what it means for them to be true, is that they're just in the circle of God's mind.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we've got a false proposition. Thank you. Now we've got a false proposition, right? The current, and I'm not even sure. I'm not convinced that the right.
Say the sky is red or something.
Well, I like mine better, but the sky is red is fine. All right, we'll go with that for now. All right, we got the sky is red, right? Now that's not a true proposition, so we can't put it in that circle. But we are talking about it like it's a proposition. So it's false.
Yeah, because God doesn't think it.
Right, so God doesn't think it, right? But then how is it a proposition? What is it? I thought propositions were just God's thoughts.
It is a proposition.
You're on the ropes, GI. You're on the rope.
Dude, I'm on the ropes, Nick. I could only frame it as that's a false thing, or it's a proposition that God knows is false, in virtue of Him not thinking it. Dude, you got me, dude.
Yeah, but then
What do you want? Do you want me to send you some money?
Seems like you. No, I'm not trying to play gotcha, but it just seems like then you think there are propositions. There are these propositions that exist, and they're not God's thoughts. Well,
I
it
wouldn't
seems like
want
you're
to say.
abandoning your.
Yeah, dude, you got me. I never thought about that before, dude. You got me.
I think what I'm not entirely clear on the idea, but I think what Anderson would say to something like that is like there's some kind of emergence that like you can always explain false propositions in terms of ones that.
Oh yeah, the truth. Yeah. It's like an implication of the sky being blue.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's probably what Anderson is.
Well, that's what I believe.
I don't.
So yeah, you didn't get me.
Fucking, you're so funny, dude. All
Wait,
right, I'm
actually,
gonna eat a burger. So I'm not gonna
before you respond to that, Jim,
Huh?
what I actually don't understand that. So Anderson would say what? The implication about what? Sorry.
It's like a building block view that like if you have all these truths in God's mind, it's compared to like meta ethics, right? It's the idea that like even though God is only good, good has the explanatory power of explaining evil. Good abductively covers evil. So even though God's not evil, He's only good. From Him you can still explain things that are evil. And I think Anderson's probably going to give a similar story about how propositions work. That like even though God only thinks true things, He only has true propositions, and they're true in virtue of Him thinking them. From that, you can explain the existence of false propositions or something like that. And they're always like these contrastive entities. They're always in contrast to God's original thoughts.
And where are those ontically in our minds?
Yeah, that's the thing though. Is like I don't really know what to do with that. Like it seems like I don't know. You'd have to ask Anderson. I don't follow that view too.
You have to.
terribly
Well,
close.
I can email him. Actually, be interesting to see what his. But you'll have to type it out though. How the question so it can be.
Yeah, I can't wait till you do, dude, because Jimmy's gonna get squished like the bug he is.
So type me up a question or how to frame it, and then I'll send it to him and see if he responds.
Okay.
Because I'm actually interested to see if what Anderson has to say to that too. I got Anderson on speed dial. I have his number and his LinkedIn and everything, all his social.
Gosh,
So
Well, but it's the nature of the procession. If you proceed from the source that is a father, then you must be a son and an only son. It's the nature of a procession. Have you ever heard the word procession? Have you paid heed to the prefix pro in the word procession?
There's just gonna be stuff like that. Like it doesn't.
Well, you see, the word responsible, it's in the word. Response. Able. Be able to respond. Part of what moral responsibility is.